can hear me? Yeah. Yes. 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 Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Estamos muy contentos de hoy día tener la participación de ustedes en esta sala conmemorando este Día Mundial de la Libertad de Prensa, donde tuvimos una inauguración muy emotiva, con muchos mensajes importantes y con las misiones que tenemos cada uno como comunicadores, como activistas, como autoridades, como usuarios comunes y, por supuesto, la democratización del conocimiento, de la comunicación, es algo que cada uno como personas tenemos que,
Each of us as a
de alguna
person
forma, tomarlo
has
muy en
in some
serio.
way take
Yo
very
quiero hoy
seriously.
día
I would
presentarme
like
también porque voy
today
a
to
estar
introduce myself
encargada
because
de
I
este
am
panel de
going to be in charge
conversación
of this
de
conversation
cómo los
panel,
estados, los gobiernos
how
tienen que ser
states and
parte
governments need
de
to be part
esta iniciativa
of
que
this
tenemos todos,
initiative that
¿no?
we
Y
all
además
have.
frente a las
And
crisis
when we're
climáticas, crisis de
facing
pérdida de
the climate
biodiversidad,
crisis, the loss of
crisis de la
biodiversity, the
contaminación
crisis
atmosférica y muchas
of
otras crisis
atmospheric
como también la
pollution,
hemos
and many
vivido, la crisis de la
crises that we've
pandemia
lived through, like the
y
pandemic,
todo lo que tenemos por
and
delante con la
everything that we
inteligencia
have ahead of
artificial,
ourselves
esta
facing
revolución de la
artificial
tecnología y que por
intelligence, this
supuesto nos pone
technological
como
revolution
gran
that puts
desafío
us in a
es
great
la
challenge.
información
And
fidedigna,
it's the
derribar la
trustworthy
manipulación de esa
information. We need
información.
to
Y
face
también parte de lo que
against the
hacemos nosotros,
manipulation
yo
of
soy
information.
presidenta
And
de la
what we do,
Asociación
well, I am
Chilena
the
de
president
Periodistas y
of the
Profesionales para
Chilean
la Comunicación y
Association
la
of
Ciencia,
Journalists
ACP,
and
soy Andrea Obaid,
Science of
la cual
Communication, Andrea
somos
Obaid.
una asociación de
We are an
160
association of
periodistas,
160
comunicadores y
journalists,
científicos
communicators, and
que se dedican a
scientists
comunicar
that
la ciencia, la
dedicate their
tecnología, la salud
lives
y el medio
to
ambiente.
link
Por
health
supuesto, también tenemos
information and the
ese
environment.
deber a nivel
And we
nacional e
have that
internacional.
duty at a
Bueno,
national
hoy
and
estamos
international level.
reunidos con
Today,
este
we
panel
are
muy
here
interesante
together
que
with
hoy
a
día
very
quiero
interesting
presentarles,
panel.
que
I
son
want to
los
introduce you to
relatores
them. These are the
internacionales que
international
cada año
rapporteurs that
hacen
every
una
year
declaración
make a
que es
statement
crucial
that
para
is
la
vital
libertad de
for
expresión
freedom of
a
expression
nivel mundial.
at a
Esta
international
declaración
level.
es
This
lanzada hoy
statement
y por
is
eso queremos
launched today,
conocerla,
and we
queremos
would like
saber
to
cuáles son
know
las
it. We
oportunidades,
want
los
to know what are
desafíos,
the
el
opportunities,
trabajo que
challenges, and the
hacen
work
estos
ahead for
cuatro
us,
relatores
and the
y
work
que
that these
sobre todo
four
este año,
speakers
como lo
do.
hemos conocido esta
And this
mañana,
year, as
el
we've
foco
seen
es la
this year,
crisis
the focus
ambiental.
is the
Todos los
environmental
ámbitos de la crisis
crisis.
ambiental,
Every
cómo podemos
aspect of the
proteger
environmental
a
crisis. How
quienes
can we
reportean
protect
estas
those who
problemáticas
report on
medioambientales,
these
cómo podemos
environmental
también
issues?
no darle
How can
voces
we
a los
also
sin
give a
voz,
voice
cómo
to the
podemos darle
people, to the
seguridad
voiceless? And how
a
can we
quienes son
give security and
activistas
safety
y
to the
comunicadores.
activists
Y es
and
por eso que hoy día queremos
communicators?
conocer
And that's why
esta
today we want to
importante declaración.
we want to
Voy
know
a
this
presentar
important
entonces a quienes
statement.
me van a
I'm going to
acompañar hoy.
introduce the people that are joining me today.
Conmigo voy a decirlo en
With
inglés,
me,
va a ser
I'm
mitad
going to say
inglés,
this in
mitad
English. It's going to be half
español,
English, half Spanish.
panel de
This
conversación,
panel, this
porque
conversation
la
panel,
mayoría de
because
quienes hoy día nos van a estar
most of the
acompañando
people
hablan
that will be
solamente
joining
inglés,
us
así
only
que
speak
quienes
English.
quieran
So
usar también su
those who
traductor
want to
simultáneo,
use
por
an
favor,
interpretation device,
puedan
please,
hacerlo.
you may
Nos
do
acompaña
so.
hoy día Miss Irene
We are
Khan,
joined by Miss Irene Khan.
UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Great applause for her. Mr. Pedro Baca, Special Rapporteur for Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Great applause for him. Online is Ms. Aurbina Gurisha Topsy-Sunu, Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information, African Commission on Humans and People's Rights. Also applause for her. And also is connected Ms. Teresa Ribeiro, represented on Freedom of the Media, OSCE. Applause for her also. Bueno, ellos van a estar hoy día conformando este panel de conversación. Queremos conocer esta
Being part of this
declaración.
panel, we want to
Por
know this
supuesto,
statement,
cuál
and of
es
course,
el rol que tienen los
what
estados,
is the
los
role
gobiernos,
that
las
states,
personas,
governments,
cuál es el
and
trabajo
people
que ellos
have?
hacen
What is the work that they
todos
do
los años en
every
conjunto,
year
cómo van a terreno,
together? How
cómo
do they go to
conocen
the
los casos
field?
de
How do
cerca
they
de
know
quienes han
these
sido
cases
víctimas de
firsthand? The
opresión
people that have
por la
been
libertad de
victims of,
expresión, quienes han sido también
oppression,
asesinados,
have been
conociendo a sus
assassinated as
familias,
well,
a los
along with their
medios donde
families.
trabajaban. Hoy día queremos conocer
Today we
todo
want to
esto
know all of
para
this
fortalecer
so
la
we can
libertad de
strengthen
prensa
the
en
freedom of the
nuestro
press
planeta.
in
Pero
our
en primer
planet.
lugar, quien
But
nos va a dar unas
firstly,
palabras y que hoy
we
día
are
también
going
nos
to hear some
acompaña y que
words of
estamos
someone
muy
that's joining
contentos
us
de que pueda
today,
hoy
and
día
we're very happy
estar
to have
aquí en
him
este
here with
evento.
us,
Es el señor Raúl
is
Fernández
Mr.
Daza,
Raúl Fernández
embajador
Daza, the
en Francia
ambassador
para Chile. Le damos
of Chile to France. Please give him a big round of applause to Mr. Ambassador, who is joining us today. He will give us a few welcoming words and kickstart this conversation. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Andrea. First, I would like to congratulate you for the work that you do in your association. It's hugely important, that capacity to be able to transmit scientific knowledge. Nowadays, we're facing a challenging environment where goals are hard to achieve, but with coordination and goodwill, I think we can cover ground. Ms. Irene Khan, Ms. Teresa Ribeiro, Orvina Geresha Topsisunu, Mr. Pedro Vaca, all of you rapporteurs, they are going to present the joint statement today. It's an honor being able to receive you all here in Chile. In Chile, it's been 3 decades where the Santiago Statement was declared, which paved the way for development in journalism and communication media in both Latin America and the Caribbean. Today, meeting together under this issue, a press for the planet, journalism facing environmental crisis, we remember our responsibilities, both with our planet and the principles of freedom of expression. This event is also an opportunity to do checks and balances on the progress we've made and the lessons we've learned on the first celebration of the World Press Freedom Day. The World Bank has estimated that if trends continue, climate change is going to push other 100 million people towards poverty by 2030. In this context, independent journalism and freedom of expression are our main tools to spread knowledge and promote dialogue that can lead to effective solutions. The journalists that report on environmental issues, they do it while running risks. There's a UNESCO study that was published regarding the dangers of the press and the safety of environmental projects that at least 749 journalists, groups of journalists and media groups that report on environmental matters have been attacked in 89 countries since 2009, all over the world. Every time a journalist is assassinated that is investigating scandals of an environmental nature, this goes beyond the painful loss of lives. It's also a blow to freedom of information and the press. Protecting journalists means preserving our rights to information. Without trustworthy information regarding the environment that independent journalism can bring to us, it's becoming harder and harder when facing the proliferation of misinformation, and it makes it really hard for us to distinguish the truth from fiction. The importance of the joint statements like the one that is being presented today by the special rapporteurs are particularly important. Historically, these documents have served as powerful tools to design policies and to include in global governance and strengthen mechanisms that protect journalists and promote freedom of expression. They exemplify the coordination necessary to tackle this multifaceted problem that journalists are facing, like the UN recommends for the safety of journalists and matters of impunity. It's been more than 10 years since the joint of executive chiefs of the UN backed this plan of action, affirming that without freedom of expression, and particularly without freedom of the press, an informed and committed citizenship is impossible. The plan provides push and financing for a coordinated framework in order to tackle the threats the journalists face. It also recognized that the people that work here are working towards development, and one of the important matters here is the conservation of the environment. As a president for the development of communications, I am proud to announce that the UN plan was designed by request of this council in 2012. And this organ of UNESCO has since then done important work to implement this plan in monitoring areas, legal support, and training. This mechanism, this monitoring mechanism informs the organizations of the status of journalism. We can also follow legal proceedings of each case when it entails the assassination of a journalist. That way we can underline the primordial responsibility of the states to ensure that deadly attacks against professionals of the media can be prosecuted properly. This information is then compiled on a report that the General Director of UNESCO that joins the Council of the PDC can introduce. UNESCO, through mechanisms like this, we have led initiatives that improve independence, plurality, and the commitment of journalists. With that, we've been able to train many journalists in research, developing crucial abilities to report on sensitive issues and environmental scandals. We've also facilitated the development of communal communications that help local news sources in areas such as mining, deforestation, and toxic waste. We've supported journalism schools and integrations in their study plans and courses regarding environmental journalism, and we brought specialized people in these matters. This has a real impact through a concerted activity, multi-sectoral and multilateral. This is the power that we can employ to create actual change. This responds to the present challenges that we're facing and gives us prospects for the future. Thank you so much for the unbreakable commitment with these ideals from all these rapporteurs, and once more, by releasing this joint statement regarding the World Press Freedom Day, let's advance with urgency and optimism, learning from the lessons of the past, and let's guide each other with our shared objectives. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your kind words and for the work that you have done as a team. And as I was saying, now we want to begin this conversation. I'm going to stay here on the side, that way we can see our two guests that are online. I want to introduce them again regarding this important topic, this joint statement of the rapporteurs regarding the environmental crisis and freedom of expression that has been launched today, that highlights the elevated risk that journalism and environment defenders are facing, and of course about human rights and the threats they face when they try to expose this work, and to lead people in order to take action, and where it's also requested, dearly requested to states and companies that they need to adopt actual measures to defend freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and liberty of association and peaceful reunion. Once more, I want a large round of applause for these four international speakers: Irene Khan, Special Rapporteur of the UN regarding the protection and promotion of freedom of expression, Teresa Ribeiro; OSCE representative for the freedom of the press, Pedro Vaca, Special Rapporteur for the freedom of expression of the American states. We also got Topsy Sunu, who works for access of information and freedom of the press. A big round of applause for all of them. Now I'm going to ask the question in questions.
Why is the right to information important in the context of the climate crisis? And how can states and other stakeholders promote access to quality, accurate, and evidence-based information while combating the spread of disinformation and misinformation that undermines public discourse?
Thank you. Thank you very much for posing that very important question about access to information. Now, information and the very important role that media play with ensuring that we all receive information, different perspectives, is an empowering ingredient. That is what empowers us as citizens to participate. And therefore, it's very critical when one is talking about the climate crisis, which is an unprecedented global challenge. There is no way that we can progress, engage with all stakeholders, and find a solution without open, free public debate, without informed decision-making, without transparency and accountability from decision makers or those who have a big role to play here, and particularly involving those communities, people living in remote areas, people who are directly affected, women, girls, minorities in some cases, indigenous peoples who are directly affected by this crisis. And in order to have that kind of debate, in order to have that kind of accountability, in order for media to function properly, you need information. There is a right to information, and it is built into the heart of freedom of expression. And so we begin in our joint declaration with that access to information, and we look at the responsibilities there. We look in particular at the responsibility of the state, and beginning with the statement that states must uphold the principle of maximum disclosure, that they must provide information in an accessible, effective, timely way, and proactively provide this information, including, where relevant, disaggregated data that is available. So we do not have to go and ask. We as citizens, we as journalists do not have to go looking for that information. The state should be open about it and provide it and collect that information properly and provide it. Then, of course, all information we know the right to information is not an absolute right. There are restrictions. But in our declaration, we make it very clear that states must live up to the international human rights standards on right to information, and only make those restrictions that are allowed under international law. The third point we make with regard to states is that states must adopt and enforce laws that compel companies to be transparent about information as well. We also call on companies, for corporations, to produce and disclose to all stakeholders, the public, civil society organizations, the affected communities and individuals, provide them with detailed information on the human rights and environmental impact of their operations, and that they should do this in a way that is simplified and understandable to the public. When it comes to companies, in the area of communications, we know the role that digital platforms play, social media companies, and we therefore cover that issue as well. And we state that online platforms should adopt human rights-based rules on content governance, content management, content curation policies, and also should be transparent and provide comprehensive transparency reports about their own ways of handling information that is relevant to environmental and climate issues, and should be open about conflicts of interest. Now, that is the positive duty of providing the information. But of course, we are all aware that there is, on the other side, this growing wave of information, disinformation, misinformation, manipulation of information. And we realize that those issues are going to be will have that kind of manipulation of false information will have very serious detrimental effect, undermining public trust, hindering effective participation of people, because you're not sure, as you know in the health sector, you're not sure what is right and what is wrong, those kinds of issues. And therefore, we also look at the responsibility of both states, but also the platforms on how to manage that. And we start by saying that states and corporations, online platforms, and the media themselves must refrain from either producing or distributing false or misleading information. They must take all measures to manage any risk of disinformation or misinformation. For example, on the side of the platforms, they have to have proper policies to address that. And then also they must take certain steps to counter disinformation and misinformation. And one of the best ways of countering disinformation and misinformation is actually by providing quality, trustworthy, evidence-based information. So there is an obligation on states, companies, social media platforms to ensure that, and to promote a healthy, what we call a healthy, free, safe, and diverse information ecosystem. And that includes media freedom, independent, professional, quality media that can provide proper information to people. So you have on the positive side the right, the obligation to provide information, both for companies and states, and on the other side, the duty to refrain from feeding disinformation and misinformation, and making sure that information, the correct information, gets to the people who are directly affected. So it's not only media, but through the media to the communities, especially to those who are in a very vulnerable state. Our joint declaration actually has a full section on people who are most affected but least able to access information, and that special attention has to be paid to them.
Yeah. Thank you, Irene. Well, we want to now give the opportunity to Teresa. How are you, Teresa? Nice to have you here in Chile, connected. This question is about this. What states and other actors should do to enhance access to quality media and reliable, diverse, and public interest information in the context of environmental challenges? We don't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me
That's
now?
okay. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that. It was my micro that was not on. Of course, I regret not being able to join the session in person, but I extend my warmest greetings to the audience as well as to my fellow colleagues in the panel. And allow me to start by reminding us that climate crisis has a continuous impact in our rule-based democracies as well as on our common security. The worsening or the deterioration of climate crisis exacerbates inequalities, creates social-political tensions, increases migrations, and of course triggers conflict. OSCE is the largest regional security organization, and it's all the activities it develops are very much anchored in a comprehensive security approach, which is a concept that includes three different dimensions. The first one is a political military dimension. The second one is environmental, and the third one is human rights. And what we are talking here about today is precisely the intersection between this second dimension and the third dimension, which is freedom of expression, being the second one, environmental. And regarding the question that you just put forward, I would like to remind us all that a holistic and multi-stakeholder approach requires the involvement of a large set of actors to play their part in tackling our common endeavor for an information space that serves the public interest. Irene already mentioned a lot of measures that should be taken by the states, by the online platforms. I would like just to add some others. Of course, as she mentioned, states should ensure that the legal and policy frameworks should not unduly limit media freedom or restrict the work of the journalists. And in a way, it should be conducive to media freedom, to the production and of information that is quality information, and quality information is the one that enables the public debate, that serves the public interest. And I think these are important concepts that were coined in the JD of last year. And professional journalists and quality medias are partners and very important ones in tackling climate crisis, so they need protection, as the ambassador reminded us in his very strong intervention. States should also look for the sustainability policies that, in a way, ensure sustainability of the media landscape. There is also another important issue, which is the obligation of states to disclose information that is related to a crisis or environmental issues. And at the same time, they can and they should create incentives for private actors to disclose relevant information. Independent public service is also an important instrument to really ensure that we have access to quality information, as well as an important and stronger regulator. We should also to pay a particular attention to ensure adequate media coverage in remote areas. And in this regard, I think it's important to pay special consideration or take into special consideration journalists working in these remote areas where actions against the environment oftentimes take place hidden from the public eye. And usually these journalists require special protection because they are very much exposed to the companies that are doing their work and are oftentimes the protagonists of attacks or crimes against climate and environment dimension. The other thing that I would like also to mention, and I think it's also important, it's not only from one side what is the information that should be there, but we need also to look at the population. So we need to improve the resilience of the population, empowering it with media literacy programs that can protect them from manipulation and disinformation. Online platforms have an important role to play in ensuring access to quality media and public interest information. So the online governance in the platforms must be anchored in human rights standards and not only on their commercial interests. Let me also remind us that in our JD on media freedom and democracy that was adopted last year, we underlined the need of these online platforms to privilege public interest information. And again, by this public interest information, we are thinking about the information that really is able to contribute to the public debate. And the public debate is what can ensure that there is a proactive engagement of civil society, environmental and human rights defenders, and that media can further help to increase the availability of the content on climate related matters. I think that also media co-regulatory and self-regulatory mechanisms should be prepared to deal with complaints related to media coverage of climate crisis. Also important is that media considers the aggravated impact on impacts climate crisis as on women or marginalized communities and reflects those impacts when reporting on climate threats. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa, for all the work and the information. A great applause for Teresa, also for Irene. Now I want to go with you, Pedro. There's a lot of things to talk about this, about the declaration too. In what ways can legal frameworks be strengthened to protect journalists, media workers, and environmental human rights defenders from intimidation, violence, and judicial harassment? How can states foster an environment where diverse voices can contribute to public discourse on climate change and environmental issues? Pero se escucha, ahí
No,
sí.
lo van a activar ya. Bueno, pues es un gusto estar con ustedes. Irene, Teresa.
I'm delighted to be with all of you, Irene, Teresa, Grisha. I see everybody here, and I am happy to be part of this joint declaration on this World Press Freedom Day. So this needs to impact in the same dimension everybody, and there's not an issue that can impact more people like it is climate change. And so we have to put focus on the links between freedom of expression. And so we made this declaration that's quite solid. And I would like to highlight some aspects about it, specifically because I see in the audience a lot of people that might be interested in some of these components. The climate crisis needs to be worked on through an informed public debate. We call this the suitable environment for public deliberation. It should be inclusive, it should be open. There are certain lines in this joint declaration that establishes that the most important thing is to also consider the knowledge as well as the experience of the people that are specifically affected by climate change. There are some rapporteurs. Most of us are seeing this from up close, these feelings, and we're seeing all of it from up close, all of these places where there are severe impacts of the climate crisis. And also, and I think that's something quite beautiful in a day such as today, environmental journalism. This environmental journalism is seen as an area of special attention, and that I hope it's especially protected as well. Regarding what I feel, I think it has to do with connecting realities. And in the beginning of March, along with the Foundation for Freedom of Press and ILEGI, as well as with the support of the Swedish service, we went to the same area where Bruno Phillips and Bruno Pereira were at the Javari Valley in the border of Peru and the Amazonas. And it is very explicit the way you see it, because these are areas that aren't just important for the fight of climate change, but these are areas that are borders that are forgotten, and where there isn't much presence of the states, where these are corridors of organized crime, as well as corridors of some practices where, and I think that there's a difference between the discussion of the Paris Agreement in different areas and the realities in which it has a goal to impact. So to connect these realities, this knowledge, is something that is in the DNA of this joint declaration. I will conclude with something very specific, and I want to share with you that component of that suitable environment that has certain variables of protecting. And if we look at the registries of people who have been murdered because of their work, of their profession, not just journalists, those advocates of human rights or environments, there is an incidence, something that needs to be taken care of, needs to be prevented, it needs to be rejected when it happens, it has to be clarified, sanctioned, so that the actors that are causing the aggressions to those who are giving a voice for the protection of the environments and the territories or those strategic areas, they should be backed up and be supported and not be abandoned. These should be safe spaces that have the necessary infrastructures with networks that allow for public debate. And there is a second component, which is the not pursuing them or not. We see criminalization processes, judicial processes, restrictions to the right of protests. And when we talk about environmental crisis, we also need to talk about not just the trends, general trends or aspirations of the states, but also the specific items, the conflict that take place with an extractive process and the demands of communities that consider that this should have a different way of working it. I remember a public audience of the ACH that talks about the carbon bonds, that it's to fight climate change, but we have communities that are telling us that maybe we're not as well informed about this, and maybe the private contracts to access these carbon bonds aren't clear enough, and so it's not horizontal. And this joint declaration can balance these inequalities. Now, in this suitable environment for participation, we also do a calling for companies to participate. The processes of moderation or curation of contents. Great part of this information is also part of vectors and digital environments, and also some complaint mechanisms towards the companies, the company powers that are intervening and that are also part of the conversation. I will conclude with this, and I would like to invite you to take a look at this joint declaration, which is a contribution that has been made historically every year, where rapporteurs from different mandates try to put the priorities and establish frameworks to guide a key topic. And in this case, if we want to face climate crisis, we need to have a public open declaration that's inclusive, plural, and that considers the voices of the people and the communities.
Thank you, Pedro. An applause for Pedro. Many questions come to mind when we hear you. We will have a space for you to ask brief questions, but I would like to give the floor to Garisha, who is also online.
Nice to meet you, to have you here in Chile. This is the question for you. Do you hear me? Yes. Yes.
Yes, I can. Good morning, and thank you for the question. Good morning, panelists, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, Garisha. What steps need to be taken to guarantee access to justice and effective redress in cases involving the violation of the right to healthy environment, freedom of expression, and access to information?
So, yes, so access to justice and in cases involving violations of the right to a healthy environment, freedom of expression, and access to information is very important. So countries have to enact access to information laws and protect freedom of expression, which allows for free, active, and meaningful participation in public matters and policy making and decision making related to environment issues, as well as other issues in seeking legal remedies. Also, there have to be laws that are enacted in specific countries, in all countries, that guarantees the right to a good environment and protect the environment from harm, and also to make sure that there is no one can be denied the right to having a safe, stable climate, as well as a non-toxic environment. Everyone should have the right to live, work.
We're losing the connection. Garisha, we don't hear you well.
And play in a safe environment. Also, there should be considered to be amendments. We have made it clear that international law requires states to provide adequate effective remedies to everyone whose rights are breached and other human rights defenders. And these defenders who face threats and violence in their course of work should be protected. States should also conduct prompt, impartial, and thorough investigations should there be allegations of threats and violence against journalists, and hold the perpetrators accountable and provide for a speedy trial of those crimes in accordance with the process of due process. States' judicial process, the systems, are adequately staffed with people who have adequate knowledge about climate-related issues so that there is a free and good access to justice, and also that all rights of all human rights defenders are protected. So these measures will allow people to challenge environmentally destructive laws and policies and make sure that we have decisions in courts that positively affect and will promote a healthy environment.
Thank you, Grisha. Thank you very much. An applause also for Grisha. For the third, well, voy a hablar en español ahora. No sé si alguien quiere hacer una
I'm going to speak in
pregunta.
Spanish now. I don't know if someone would like to ask a question. You can take advantage that we have these 4 international speakers that are going to release this joint declaration for the freedom of the press, for lack of censorship, and the protection of communicators and journalists and activists that are informing and reporting and taking action against the climate crisis. I would like to ask you a question, Pedro, taking advantage of what you commented with already. I don't know if somebody else will join in. How can we make sure that the media and Chile and other countries can also open more spaces for research in matters of the environment? That way they won't be oppressed by sponsors or interested parties that are in charge of the commercialization of selling these spaces. Unfortunately, many journalists and communicators are censored or conditioned with the content that we're supposed to report on because of the money that is being invested in the media and is closely related to environmental issues. Well, I think sometimes it's better to focus in what is lacking than what we already have, because what's there, it can be criticized. I think that in these issues is more than what we're lacking. How much environmental journalism do we have in national media, international media, specializations on the matter? Frankly, there's very little for the scope of the issues. So anything that has to do with quality in media, what happens in this first circle is a reflection of the media. The question that I would ask is, what is happening inside the media that is creating these sections, programs, specialties? Do they have the resources to deploy on the field? Are we going through an economic crisis? This is also a time where we're asking the media to make quick transmedia information with 2 cents. So I think we also need to think in that component as well. When I was in the triple border near the Amazon, one thing that surprised me was that the broadcasters, there were projects of indigenous communities that lacked physical technology in terms of radio broadcasting or other types of broadcasting. They were set aside and forgotten. I think there's something very important also for public media, especially college media, university media, and to incentivize the creation of information, the reporting of information. The other question, the other component that not only affects climate crisis, but also living as in a community, is that in the media ecosystem, there's many conflicts of interest. So as there are conflicts of interest, they not only affect what is being said and how it's said, but also what is not being said. And in that line, I think there's two things that we need to do in all fields of communal living, is to promote the media to be explicit about their standards of excellence in all the content they produce, and make it very horizontal and transparent, all the conflicts of interest that they may have with different actors of society, while at the same time incentivizing and making sure that there's better journalism on issues that are critical. So there's very little of that, and there's a lot to criticize, but we need to take care of it. And what we're sorely lacking and needs to be built is how do we connect communities? For example, the international correspondents, they also go to these critical areas that are being affected by climate change, but not just because a journalist was assassinated or an environmental activist, but it's also because this journalist was also narrating a reality that still exists, and it's still persisting to this day. Exactly, like you said, the media should have spaces to tell these stories, to give voice to the voiceless. Somebody wants to ask a question? Somebody has a microphone that they can give to this person? She does not have a microphone, so we are unable to interpret what she's saying.
The interpreters cannot work without a
problema es que
microphone.
la interpretación no toca con micrófono.
Espérate.
Sí, gracias. Soy
Yes, thank you.
Sapien,
I am
vengo
Raquel
de
Sapien.
México,
I come from
vivo
Mexico.
en Sinaloa,
I
un
live in
estado
Sinaloa, a
agrícola
state, a
pesquero.
farming state and
Hace
fishing
unos
state.
momentos se
A
mencionaba
few
que
moments ago, you
no puede
mentioned
haber
that
un
there
combate
can't
a la
be
crisis,
a fight against the
ambiental
climate
sin
crisis
tomar en cuenta las
without
voces
taking
de
into account the
las
voices
comunidades
of the
y
communities
sin dar apertura
and without
a la información por parte de los
giving
estados.
open
Mi
information
pregunta
from the
es,
states. My
¿quién
question
y
is,
cómo está
who
vigilando
and
a los
how
estados
is
para
surveying
que, para
and
asegurar
looking at the
que se
states
está,
and
que está
making
fluyendo
sure
la
that the
información
information
y
is
para
flowing,
asegurar que
and to
se le
make
está
sure
dando
that
la voz a
they're,
las
the
comunidades para
the
que
communities
estos
are being given a
compromisos
voice. So these
internacionales y
international
estos acuerdos
commitments and these
lleguen
agreements
realmente a los
can
territorios.
actually
Y la
reach
segunda
these
pregunta
territories.
es,
And the second
¿quién
question
y
is,
cómo está
who and
llevando un
how
seguimiento de
is
las y los
following up
periodistas
on
que de manera
these journalists
independiente
that
hemos emprendido
independently
nuestros propios
we
proyectos
have made
periodísticos
our
y que
own
no contamos
journalistic
con ningún
projects and we
respaldo
have
o
no
con
sort
alguna
of
red de apoyo?
backing or
Gracias.
support network? Thank you.
Irene, do you want to answer the questions?
Yes, I could try, but Pedro might also want to speak from the particular regional perspective. Well, there are different layers of accountability. The first layer of accountability for the state, of course, is the democratic institutions of the state itself, the parliaments, the Congress, the elections that you have, the public meetings, transparency, accountability. That is why we emphasize those principles there. And in some way, our joint declaration actually adds to that system of accountability, because through our joint declaration, we are actually setting out the international standards. The expectations of what a state should be doing is the first way of holding the state to account. Then we expect, and we make it clear in our declaration, the role of civil society, the role of the communities themselves, the role of the legislature, for example, to hold the executive accountable. But then there is the international human rights system. And in fact, we as special rapporteurs are part of that human rights system. We have an obligation to monitor what the states are doing. Take Mexico. Mexico is a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, where the right to freedom of expression is explicitly laid out. Mexico reports through what we call a universal periodic review, through a peer review system. Mexico is obliged to report to the United Nations there. And of course, there is the Inter-American human rights system that holds it accountable. So there are these very complex international systems, but there are also national systems. But most importantly of all, we hope that through the free flow of information, opening up information, through the laws that you have, the Escazú agreement in this region, for example, and better interaction between the different actors, there will be a mutual accountability system coming up, because that is what you need, in fact. You don't have to run to Geneva to complain as local communities, but the local communities, we mention it very clearly, should have access to the companies, for example, and the companies should engage with them, engage with the local media, for example. So at every level, you have at the local level, national level, in the context of Mexico, the level of the state, the federal government, and the international level, there are mechanisms. But people have to engage with those mechanisms for them to work well, and for that you need information. So it's a kind of a interlinked system of accountability.
Thank you, Irene. Pedro, ¿tú quieres complementar? ¿No? Gracias. Bueno, es muy importante lo que comentaba la colega, porque hay muchos periodistas y comunicadores que somos, bueno, algunos independientes, otros que a lo mejor trabajamos de freelance, pero que se investiga, ¿no?, con los propios medios conflictos ambientales, ¿no? Y falta financiamiento, falta también un medio para difundir esta información que es tan relevante y que puede impactar en las decisiones que tomen la población, y también fiscalizar a las empresas que están contaminando y que están afectando la salud de esas personas que viven en un sector. Así que de verdad, muchas gracias por la pregunta. Una pregunta más, por favor, allá, para ya ir cerrando esta sesión que ha estado muy, muy interesante, y gracias por acompañarnos hoy día.
No, ¿quién era? Era acá.
Okay.
Bueno, hay muchos con la mano levantada, pero ¿era ella? ¿Ella quería hablar?
Ella no quiere.
¿Ya no?
Sí, gracias.
Bueno, en relación a la libertad de expresión, a la libertad de prensa y lo que nos convoca el día de hoy, me gustaría también, como dijo ella anteriormente, si Pedro me puede responder qué es lo que están haciendo para que las comunidades se mantengan informadas y comunicadas. Si en Chile, por ejemplo, actualmente, hace poco tuvimos el apagón digital, donde todas las comunidades en regiones y la gente más humilde, considerando que acá el 80% de la población vive con una miseria, se quedó sin acceso a la televisión. No todos cuentan con celular, ni con internet, ni con antenas, ni con acceso a los dispositivos. Y Televisión Nacional, que es un canal de señal abierta, con recursos de todos los chilenos, ya no puede emitir una señal que llegue a todos los rincones del país. Entonces, ¿cómo podemos estar hoy día hablando aquí de que queremos garantizar la información y la libertad de prensa cuando a la mayoría de la población más sencilla se le niega algo tan básico como es el acceso a las noticias y a la información en nuestro propio país? Yo entiendo que ahora todos tienen acceso con la tecnología, pero ese universo está muy centralizado, es en la región metropolitana y en las ciudades con mayor población en Chile. Pero la mayoría, lamentablemente, no solamente la nana de la casa, no solamente la persona que vive en una zona aislada, sino que la gente de edad, la gente mayor ni siquiera sabe encender un televisor de los que se utilizan ahora, ni siquiera un Smart TV. Incluso en mi casa hay televisores antiguos. Y es porque los ha pillado la tecnología y me parece que no se está haciendo nada, y aquí se pregona todo el tiempo que sí, que van a tener información, que van a tener acceso a ciertas cosas, y no se está haciendo. Me gustaría saber qué es lo que van a hacer al respecto, porque esto que ocurrió en Chile va a pasar después en Perú, en Ecuador y en otros países donde la gente ni siquiera tiene dinero para comprar una lavadora o, peor aún, un televisor. Eso sería mi pregunta. Gracias.
Es interesante la pregunta porque además, si bien estamos en una revolución digital y hay multiplataformas para informarse y ahora la tendencia es a on demand, pero claramente todavía faltan medios de cómo acceder a la información más tradicional. Pedro, no sé si quieres también responder esa pregunta que hacía o Irene o también Teresa.
Parece que hay algo con la interpretación.
¿Sí?
There has been no interpretation for the last few minutes.
Yeah, Teresa, please, can you answer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I could follow
Excellent.
the comments. There were more comments and were more complained than about the situation that you are living in certain countries in your region than a real question. Of course, to have access to the infrastructure that really distributes the information is key. We can have wonderful information that is produced by high quality journalists, respecting professional standards. But if the distribution infrastructure is not there, allowing the entire population to accede to this information, to use this information, and in doing so, participating in the public debate, of course, we have a real problem. And so we need to produce the information, we need to have the right infrastructure to distribute the information, and of course, we need also this proactive engagement of the entire society to be really interested and understand the importance of being actively involved in the debate around climate crisis, because climate crisis is not just affecting part of the population. No, it's affecting all of us. It's really an issue that everyone should look at very very closely, and also should also be very active in expressing their voices, and in also have clear opinions on what the authorities should adopt as measures to tackle the climate environment issues. So we need to look at it from a multifaceted way and act in different dimensions. The production of information, the distribution of the information, and of course the involvement of the population. And part of this involvement is also done through media literacy, to interest people, to make them aware of the importance of participating in these very important debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Bueno, yo quiero agradecerles a Teresa, a Gurisha, a Pedro, a Irene. ¿Queda alguna pregunta? ¿Sí? ¿Cansamos? Sí, no, obvio.
Perdón, gracias. Tenemos un serio problema en el medio ambiente porque no reciclamos y todo tiene una obsolescencia programada. Entonces, si nosotros estamos desechando cosas que todavía sirven, independientemente de que sea para actualizar la tecnología, y sin pensar en gente que necesita estar comunicada, estamos cometiendo un doble error. Se me fue ese detalle.
De todas maneras, bueno, y de hecho la semana pasada, para cerrar,
we're committing a double mistake. And actually, to conclude last week, the declaration of the Treaty of World of Plastics that promotes or motivates countries to reduce the plastic more than recycling. We need to attack it from the origin, which is a reduction of all of the elements that have plastics, because we know that scientific evidence has proven that plastics, microplastics and nanoplastics have reached our blood, the placenta, breast milk, and we are intoxicated with plastics. And this is not something that I am saying, but World Health Organization has stated this. I would like everybody to give a round of applause to our special rapporteurs. The declaration can be found in the international sites and also sites from the UN. And I would like to conclude with a reflection. I think that here we knew of this declaration that is on every day for freedom of expressions to keep the rights of activists, journalists, and I believe that all of us here are voices that can be heard, voices that are making changes, and we need to motivate everybody to give us an opportunity to express ourselves freely. We don't necessarily need to be journalists. If you're a leader in a company, if you're researchers, leaders in any area that you're in, we all have the duty to communicate scientific evidence, to communicate what we are doing, and together work for transparency. I think that what is happening today is very important, what's happening in the world, and let's remember that crisis, climatic crisis, environmental sanitary crisis, all this revolution that we're experiencing with the evolution of technology puts more challenges ahead, and it can be horrifying, but let's think that from this change we can do something much better for our country and for our planet. So let's keep fighting and moving forward and speaking without fear. Thank you for being here.